Oh, that's really neat. Oh, that's hot. That's too hot. It's too hot. Minnesota has a unique story in that Warren McKenzie started something here that has grown and grown and grown, but it can absolutely be traced back to his dedicated educational efforts to the public to create an understanding of what pottery was, and therefore to create a market for pottery so that one could make pottery and make a living. So he and his first wife, his late wife, they set up their studio so that people could come and buy pots in the showroom and at the same time see them working and making the pottery.
I bought this pug mill about 1970 because my shoulders were wearing out from wedging clay. And at that time, I was still using about 12 tons of clay a year. And without that pug mill, I wouldn't be making pots today. I just couldn't do it. I thought I was going to be a painter. And so I sought a position at the Chicago Art Institute. It was the best painting school around where I lived. I worked there as a painting major for about a year and a half and then got drafted into the Army. When I got out of the Army in 1946, I came back thinking I'm going to pick up on my painting classes. But every returning GI who wanted to go to school was in school, and the Art Institute was full.
There are multiple ways to get this information today. Of course, centuries ago, pottery was handed down from father to son, or it was taught by an apprenticeship.
Okay. I want to tell you more about something about that later.
Today, in Minnesota, and in this group of people that we're looking at, we're seeing several different kinds of learning situations, or sharing situations, you could call it.
You know what shoes your cup?
We have one example in here of an educational apprenticeship, and that's Richard Bresnahan, who himself had a traditional kind of apprenticeship in Japan.
You pull out like this and then it goes.
So when he came back, he set up an apprenticeship situation here at St. John's University so that he could teach in that same way through the practice.
And then he takes half of this on his thumb.
That's it. That's it. Is that it? Yep. Good.
To me, that's one of the fascinating things about this concept of pulling these 8 people together, because they show us a lot of ways that knowledge is transmitted, and values, I'd say. Pottery often involves a kind of lifestyle, so it's not that you go to work from 8 to 5 and then go home and have a real life. Pottery is your real life.
The first memory I have of playing with anything that was plastic was playing with worm casts in a school when I was a kid, and there would be an assembly and we'd be out on this amphitheater on the grass and there were worm casts, and I'd spend the time rolling coils and stuff like that, and I was kind of impressed with the fact that you could actually do that with this material, which turned out to be, clay.
I bought a ceramic canning jar, I think when I was in junior high, 7th grade or something, for $25 at a church auction. And that was sort of my introduction to pottery. It was an old stoneware Red Wing canning jar with a zinc lid.
I was getting a degree in art education, so I was doing, everything, and then you had to focus on one thing. And I think what happened to me is there was a teacher that was high in demand who I would have loved to have studied with, but I could never get into his class. And then the other pottery teacher was kind of out of his mind.
I was just kind of a regular college student in both art and music, and had to take a requirement of either printmaking or ceramics, and I was terrified of the printmaking teacher, so I took ceramics.
All the painting classes were filled. So I said, well, what's open? And they said, well, there's a room in the ceramics class. If I'd been smart, that might have told me something, but it didn't. I said, I'll take ceramics and start back in school, and then I'll get into painting later on.
I was first exposed to handmade pottery in 1966. I was taking an art appreciation class, and the teacher brought in people from the Kansas City Art Institute, students, to demonstrate their various art forms. A potter came in, and I was floored.
I was interested in art in high school, mainly because I wasn't interested in anything else.
I was so divorced from doing anything like this myself. I mean, conceptually, I didn't immediately think I want to do that. I thought about it. I want to have some of this to have in my life, and so I started looking for it in at craft fairs, and I met this guy who I bought a couple pots from, Jim Vandergrift. And after, I don't know, the second or third pot I bought from him, he said, you know, you should come out to my studio sometime and give it a try. By the end of that summer, I had completely taken the mantle on in my own mind that I was going to be a potter for the rest of my life.
I was kind of at a loss. I didn't know what to do. It was the 60s. I was just getting out of a high school in Massachusetts. And my dad was involved in the dairy industry, and he wanted me to take over the business. So he was anxious for me to learn English and to go and study in the Midwest. So I went to college in Iowa. I had to take a course in ceramics, a humanities requirement. And I just flipped about ceramics. I was in the studio all the time. But it didn't work out for me in terms of my funding for college, so I was out of school for a couple of years.
So then, I was doing printmaking, and I had a wonderful teacher, and I just stayed with that.
I got into St. John's because I had been drafted, and one of the monks felt that there was enough young people dying over there. He was going to make sure I got into this university. Okay? So I took a clay class my freshman year to kind of balance out that I might have a grade point average to stay in the college.
I was sort of turned on to clay when I was taking a sculpture class. Previous to that, I'd be working in wax or plaster or like paper sculptures and those sorts of materials I wasn't really getting a reaction from. I wasn't really able to make some sort of communication with. But with clay, of course, it does reflect the hands of the user in a different way.
The woman who taught it, she knew the subject, but she was not a potter. And she didn't teach us about being potters. In fact, I realized after I had finished my schooling that in 2.5 years in this ceramic class, we had never once discussed, as we used to do in painting classes, why this painting worked and this one didn't. Why does this pot work and that one doesn't?
I went to Bemidji State, and I started taking art classes, drawing and painting, and eventually I wound up taking a ceramics class, a hand building class, and that was okay, but wasn't that great. And then I took a wheel class, and I started to really get interested in it.
When you try on a really nice pair of gloves that fit the first time you pull them on, that's what that felt like. It was perfect. The first experience with doing it, making a pot, spinning a pot, I thought I could do this as a complete person. You know, you work with your hands, with your heart, with your head. So I changed my major and started taking art classes.
Well, I didn't really get into pots until after college, really, in a big way. I have a printmaking degree in undergraduate work and traveled abroad, taught in Sydney, Australia for almost 4 years. And when I was teaching at this particular school, one of my colleagues was really into clay. And so I started working with her because I hadn't had much experience or exposure. Loved it, and then started doing workshops, became a member of their ceramics community, liked doing workshops and that kind of thing, and then rented a studio space there and just got hooked on it and never stopped.
While in Chicago Art Institute, one of the students had come in one day and she said, you know, I've just found this book and it's a wonderful book and it tells us much more about being potters than what we're learning here in class. And so we all rushed out and bought. It was a potter's book by Bernard Leach, which had just been published in America. We read that book, and Bernard told how he had started his pottery and how the skills that one needed to have to run a pottery. He said any potter should be able to make at least 50 pots a day. Any potter should be able to throw a cylinder 14 inches tall. We couldn't do any of those things with the training we were getting. But what we did was to say, that's the right idea. And we snuck into the classroom when the teacher wasn't there. And we tried to do what Leach told us to do, which of course we couldn't do. We made a lot of mess. We made a lot of bad pots, but it gave us a clue about what we needed.
After a while, I ran into the Potter's Book, and I fell in love with those old pots that Leach described. These are actually pieces that belonged to Warren that I finally was able to see in person at his house many years later. I decided what I wanted to do was get an apprenticeship, and it turns out that there was a potter in the vicinity, Clary Ilian, who had been an apprentice of Leach, of Bernard Leach. And I went and talked to her, but at the time she was focused on nurturing women clay artists. And so that didn't work out.
Well, I guess it was interesting in college and art school. I never had any female teachers ever.
I was in my second semester of class, and I started throwing with the material, and my teacher, Bill Smith, he said, there's going to be an international conference in Banff, Canada, where that's the first time on the North American continent that potters and artists, clay artists from all over the world will come to Banff, Canada. How about if we go with my old Travelall and some tents, and a group of us drive all the way up to Banff, Canada, and go to this Ceramics Internationale, sponsored by the Canadian government? And I said, sure, I'm in. So they picked me up in Bismarck, North Dakota, and we drove all the way up to Canada. And we were some of the only students there. There were 460 artists from all over the world. And then you realize they're not talking about what we were talking about in college. They were talking about how to get clay into people's lives, environmentalism, social issues that made a difference in people's lives. They were talking about communities of people, not the individual artist in many cases. And then the exhibitions were just absolutely fantastic because you saw these great works from Taiwan, Korea, Japan that you'd never seen before. So it was right then and there I said, this is my family. That's it. I'm going to become a ceramic artist.
I don't think I ever made a conscious choice that pottery would be my life. I think my choice was more, how can I keep doing this? I just kept finding a way to keep working.
On an ideal morning, you know, it might start out with some tea. I guess it'd be the equivalent of having like a morning meeting, water cooler style. And then after that, we'd kind of try to get to work. So maybe some clay wedging or working with those things. Checking on the damp room to see if there are some pieces that need flipping, right? We have this really great damp room that allows us to move around in it, for one thing, and also, you know, move pieces through that and really control how slowly they dry out, dry vanning. To kind of be able to take each day as it comes and say that, okay, well, today I was able to accomplish some pottery, okay, and then maybe the next day, oh, I was able to work on maybe a small personal sculpture, and then the next day saying that, oh, I was able to work on, you know, some small management for the national tour. To be able to find some fulfillment and to be able to have the time to stretch that out to see those different goals, to some progress.
Apprenticeship is a personal self-discovery where that the young person learns about themselves in creating in that creative process. And I had known Stephen from college because I had him as a student in my environmental architecture and design class. So I knew about his focus ability, his high technical skills. And what we look for then is how does that young person, he or she, work with others in community, because this is a community environment. And then what we do is then we have them participate with the wood firing. And that participation with the wood firing, they get a chance to be in a very intensive environment. And then I put them on the all-night shift with a former apprentice who's been coming for the last 11 firings. That's how then he began his apprenticeship, was he came into the studio in preparation for that firing, and then came in also to help with editing the book, organizing the exhibition, being the lead person to do the National Touring Exhibition. So he came in under two patterns of work. Then how good are they at note-taking? You know, are they doing drawings? If they're doodling at the margins, that means they're thinking about process. Can they take direction? Can say, we need you right here so that when I'm stoking, the piece is coming right into my hand because I'm trying not to hit any work going into the narrow part of the stoking chamber.
You know, the wood firing I found to be this really amazing experience that, you know, meant that all of a sudden we had all this help. You know, it was really wonderful to have all these people that, although I maybe had not met them before, because of their history with the studio, were willing to share that information with me. A number of people in my generation were very happy to be on that night crew, so that was fun to experience the wood firing at nighttime, because then you can really focus on having those conversations about, you know, what are the processes that are going on at that moment.
I wanted to be a potter. I totally wanted to be a potter. I didn't want to just be a potter, I wanted to make a living as a potter. Even though in 1967, there were none. I mean, even the guy I was apprenticing with was a high school art teacher. So I went on a quest to find a professional potter who was out making a life. I can't say that I, you know, did this coast-to-coast search, but we didn't have the internet, and so I did it by car. I heard rumors about Colorado, and I went out to Colorado Springs. Somebody said there's this couple up in Black Forest that have a pottery, and they might talk to you. So I was Lou and Al Wynn, and called them and made an appointment and came up and told them what my quest was. He said, there's just no way. But he said, well, while you're here, you know, let's make some pots. So I sat down and made pots, and all day long until his wife came home. And they said, well, you know, since you're here, why don't you stay for dinner? And so over dinner, they looked at each other and said, we'd like to offer you space here. So I went home, got all my junk, and came back, and I slept on the floor of the studio for a couple of weeks until I found an apartment. And I was there for a year and a half. I learned a ton, even though when I left there, I was still a horrible potter, but I knew a lot.
How old were you?
I was 20, I think.
Oh.
Maybe
So you had
20.
never taken ceramics in college?
One semester,
Okay.
yeah, and then I left school.
I met Linda coming out here to buy our pots for our house. That's kind of the very beginning.
But then you asked if I would design you a
Yeah,
kiln,
then
a wood
many,
kiln.
right. Then I was on a sabbatical from my teaching position, And I was switching gears, and I had done a little bit with wood firing. And I asked Linda if I could fire with her maybe once. Just twice.
No, actually, you said you
And
asked.
then,
That's not what I remember. I remember you asked if I would design you a wood kiln.
right, that was part of the
That was
question
the
too.
that was the first part.
The equation.
The equation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And then I remember thinking, well, it's such a lot of work and commitment, and I thought, well, maybe you should just fire with me for a few times and see if you like it,
That's true.
and then build your kiln.
Then I never built my kiln. I just stayed with Linda.
Yeah, but you actually built your foundation and got
I
a bunch
did.
of wood.
I
and
did.
got some bricks and.
I got wood, I got all that stuff. And then we never got beyond the foundation because
Yeah, it just felt good.
we just worked together. Salt, when it vaporizes, gives you a sheen on your work. And then we're going to make them wet. It makes it pop and vaporize quick.
Are you set to go, Jill?
Yeah.
On the salt? I think
Yeah.
I'll just choke this up and then we can do the
Okay.
salt.
Okay.
Okay.
Ready?
Yep.
Here goes.
How about that cup? It worked out. It's been like 16 years,
16
I
years.
think. 15, 16 years.
That's right.
And then having Kirk here as well all these years has just been tremendous for me.
At some point there, like maybe my second class in ceramics, it was all, that was going to be it. I just took every class available, and I was the teaching associate and the studio tech, and I spent all my time down there. And it wasn't totally about pottery at that time. It was just about working with clay, whether it was sculptures or pots. I didn't really know a lot about the tradition of pottery in Minnesota, other than the St. Croix Valley Pottery Tour poster that we had on our wall, and then we made some trips down to the Northern Clay Center to the American Pottery Festival. And so I was becoming aware of this, and I was really into moving clay around, and I saw Bob working, taking pots that were round and pushing them, into new shapes, and just, being really what appeared to be casual with the material. I was really intrigued by that. And then while he was doing this, you were talking about the Spring Pottery Tour. So he was saying, I'm a host for this sale, and in my backyard we put all the pots out on boards, and he has guest artists, and it's like a show, a sale, and a party, and a festival all in one thing. And I was sort of blown away from my limited exposure too. And Bob's work really didn't seem like the other pottery that I was seeing at the time being made, which was mostly glossy things that were round. I thought, this makes sense. Like, I think I could do this. Like, eventually I wrote him a letter, just kind of a shot, like, I'll just try this, write this guy a letter.
For the last 32 years, we have looked at young people coming to the studio and a semi-application process where they're interested in apprenticeship. They come for an interview. The particular challenge with an apprenticeship program is its foundation is to go into a cycle and an immersion of nature, that the rhythms and time frames of reaction periods are based around the seasons and the material and the firing cycles. It's a whole new place of discovery. So that kind of framework of rhythm and pattern is a little bit easier to develop in the sense of the studio activity, so that they know that then in the evening times, when the studio is quiet, and they want to have this immersion of throwing and relationship with the form and development, that this is their time in this space just for themselves.
It changed our whole life, really, this book, because that part is the most beautiful Korean pot I think I've ever seen. That was so exciting to me when I saw it first in this book, because it looks like it's still spinning on the wheel, if you can disregard the decoration on it. It's so full of life, you know?
Leach's book was very important to me. It was really the only source of information, how to do things, aesthetics, towards a standard. I mean, it's very, rigid in many ways, but that was the only book we really had. And a lot of the photographs in that book were very important to me. In fact, one of my very favorite pots in the whole world is in that book. And I had the opportunity to visit that pot in London at the V&A, and I was so disappointed when I saw it. I thought, what is wrong with it? And I realized it wasn't black and white. It was, I had known this photograph and this beautiful pot all these years as a black and white picture, medieval picture, and here it was green.
Because of reading that book, when Alex and I moved to St. Paul and very quickly found out we did not have the skills, we decided to approach Leach and see if he would take us as apprentices. And so we saved enough money to take a trip to Europe. And from Europe we went to England and down to Cornwall, which was where Leach had his pottery, right near the tip of Cornwall, Land's End. We had written ahead, told him we wanted to come and discuss apprenticeship. And he looked at our work, and his face kind of fell, and he said, well, I'm sorry, we're full up, which was his way of saying no. We had a reservation for 2 weeks in the bed and breakfast place where we were staying. So we said, well, at least could we hang around the pottery and learn as much as we can in 2 weeks? And Bernard said, yes, that was fine. And so every day we'd come up the pottery and ask questions and watch the people who were working there. And we did learn a lot. At the end of that 2 weeks, they were firing their large oil-fired kiln. And at that time, this would have been about 1949, Leach was still sitting a kill watch. That is, you have to have people there all the time watching the kiln, adjusting the burners so that the temperature goes up and the right degree of smoke or non-smoke is achieved. So Bernard said, would you like to come up and talk? And he didn't tell us. His kill watch was from 1 o'clock in the morning until 4 in the morning. So we said, certainly would. This is our last couple of days in England. And we went down and caught a quick couple hours of sleep, and then we trudged up this long hill from the town up to the pottery. And we talked with Bernard from 1 o'clock till 8 in the morning. He asked us about what we felt about, the social situation that existed in the world. He asked us about what our experiences had been, things of that sort. But we never discussed the critical thing, the quality of what makes a good pot. But at the end of 8 hours, Bernard said, as we went off to bed, he said, well, I've changed my mind, and you can come back and be apprentices if you wish.
Bob called me back right away. It almost scared me because he's like, you must have found somebody else. And I was like, whoa, no, he invited me to come down, and Bob explained to me, what he had in mind, and mainly emphasized that he didn't need anybody to make his pots. He was going to be making his own pots, and what he would give me is a place in here in his studio to make my own work and get feedback, as well as watch him go through the process of being a working potter. And that was perfect for me.
I teach them painting disciplines, and then I'll give them a painting style to work on, because they have to know the perfect fluidity of the iron, that we're grinding our own iron here from the clay deposit, so that a couple extra drops of water will allow the brush to give a flow. If it's too stiff and the brush pulls and chatters across the brush, they don't have enough water. So those are all the learning disciplines they learn to get to a point. And so once they get to a point of really good high quality, then they start putting the studio seal, which is a separate seal, and then their signature. So then as that person evolves and they get comfortable making work, then they always will get the income from that work. Then they can say, I can see myself as a longer term apprentice being part of this, because this structure is well set up for me to be able to make a living, so that I can save enough money to make a transition to another studio or having a family. I can see this. So the long-term goal is that every apprentice, now, the senior apprentice now gets a salary and he gets health care. We've been working on this for 30 years.
I don't know if they should give this to Sister Johanna or not.
I'm a fire chief's daughter.
There we go.
Good luck.
All right, now Richard, stand back, please.
My art history teacher, Sister Johanna Becker, who is considered the greatest Asian art historian of America. So she was doing this ancient Karatsu book in English, and I was a junior in college, and looking at the graduate programs, I had this gnawing sense that my window was only an undergraduate education. I was not going to be able to have the money to go to graduate school. And so I just kind of went to her in a panic my junior year, end of junior year, and I said, Sister Johanna, I don't know what to do with my life. I don't know how to build kilns. I don't know how to find clay. I don't know how to do anything to build a life for myself in ceramics. Well, then she looked at me and she said, well, I hate to tell you this, but you're going to have to leave your country. The only place that's going to answer those requests is you have to go to Japan. She says, I've got one more summer where I'm doing kiln excavation work and doing one more final interview with the Nagasato family, and I will ask them on your behalf to take you in as a full apprentice. So then she left. And so I'm sitting there, working in North Dakota, trying to get ready with the idea that I might be going to Japan, and no language skills, no passport, nothing yet. And I get this little tiny postcard in the mail in August, and says, apprenticeship secured, get passport, arrive by August 25th. Johanna, little tiny postcard. They owed her a big favor. It had nothing to do about me or my talents. The condition was they would take Sister Johanna's student for 90 days as a test run. In the first 90 days, I didn't even get on the potter's wheel. They wouldn't let me even touch the potter's wheel, which is very different from the way we educate here.
We had in fact taught for 2 years, which we shouldn't have, but we had. We'd taught and we'd try to run our own pottery, which we failed with. But they said they must know how to make pots. And they gave us a very small making list for the next firing, which was 3 weeks away. My making list was 150 pots, 50 beer mugs, 50 small jugs, and 50 soup bowls. Well, I started out on the beer mugs. I think I probably made 500 of those beer mugs before 50 of them were allowed to go through as coming up to the minimal standard that they wanted. And that was good training. That was where we really learned to be potters.
We worked 7 days a week. The apprenticeship is that you were up at 6 in the morning, and then you'd sweep and clean the studio. And there was a dirt floor studio, so there was always dirt to sweep. And then you slid back the wood from the Doherty fire that was put back and started the charcoal fire, the wood fire, to start tea in the morning, getting kiln loading going. And then I had to wedge all the clay from my teacher, which was 300 pounds of clay, in the morning. So when he came down at 9 or 10 in the morning, he could start instantly throwing. And then you had tea at 9 when he came down, and that was the dialogue for the day. Lunch at noon, tea at 3. It was really a tsunami, a wave of information that just carried you. And it was all-encompassing. There's a very funny Japanese term for potters in Japan. They say kuchiganai. Kuchi means lips. They have no lips. And I was wondering, why is that? And then I found out why is that Japanese potters don't say anything. They're not going to take you out and say, you got to do it exactly like this. They're not going to do that. You have to learn with your eyes and an occasional question. Or they're going to walk up to you and say, you need to hold your hand in this position like this, and then they'll walk away. You have to really use all of your senses to pull the information into you. So when you have that structure, that means that when you get to a certain point, then you're prepared to ask the next question.
I saw a poster and it said, had a little outline of a mountain, and it said ceramics, and then it said scholarship, and I thought, aha, that could be me. So I applied and I got a full scholarship to the Banff Center School of Fine Arts, and it was just an amazing place at that time. It was a 2-year residency, no instruction or teachers or anything, just visiting artists and just work. It was great. I'm a skier. I tried to not ski very much. And I met John Chalk there, who was a British fellow who lived in Calgary and was a great potter and teacher at the Alberta College of Art. He designed a wood-fired kiln. That was my first experience with a wood-fired kiln. And we had a Sinvaram press that the Peace Corps had used, and we made our own bricks. And I enjoyed his love of life and hard work, and he had kind of all the right qualities I just so admired in someone. Made beautiful pots, and it came at just the right time for me. He probably could have been sort of a mentor for me from a distance. He and John Reeves, they got me in touch with medieval English pottery, and then I jumped to some other countries, in my just looking at pots. But they were the two people that really pointed me, probably pretty indirectly, to some time periods and some pots that I actually felt them and looked at them and had a connection to them. And it wasn't just, oh, isn't this pretty? It was, wow, this is really something.
I could write a book about what it's like to work with Linda and how she sort of took me in. Well, it just started out sort of like kind of innocently, where I needed to explore or have some more information to see if really truly I wanted to take the lead, become engaged in doing more wood firing, process with my work. And Linda, was so gracious and so warm to have me. And then we started working together. We did one firing, and then we did a second, and that was kind of what I thought would kind of be it. And it just sort of never stopped. And I think I always felt like, even though Linda, she could come out here and fire her own kiln all by herself, cut all the wood by herself. There's something really wonderful working together. Wow, look at the ash. Stunning. I like it. And then Linda, she always puts you before her. Always. And that's pretty cool.
Don't you think?
Yeah, and then the contrast with where the salt cut on.
Yep, I think those are nice. Let's see the two together. Yeah, I like the way this way.
Yeah, I reversed.
We reversed it. I like that.
I was at a certain point in my direction and I hit a wall. And finally, I just turned to my teacher in Japanese and I said, "What are you thinking when you're doing this?" I said, "Are you thinking about the width and depth, every piece? Or are you thinking about how I'm going to fold this? Are you going through a structure? I do this, 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 and I just keep thinking about this structure?" And he looks at me and he says, "I'm trying to not think about anything. I'm turning this mind off to allow this spirit to speak." And of course, I didn't understand that.
We happened to arrive on the same boat that Leach was on, returning from America from a lecture tour. And so we'd gotten to be friends in the time of crossing. And he said, as we arrived in Southampton, "Do you have a place to live?" And we said, "Well, we haven't got a place, but we'll find a bed and breakfast and rent a room." Well, he said, "Do you want to live with me?" Because he just separated from his second wife. And Bernard was a person who couldn't stand living alone. He needed someone to bounce ideas off of constantly, because he was thinking pots 24 hours a day. So that was our great luck. We had 2 years of living with this man, and he thought about pots at breakfast time. He'd finished his bowl of cereal, he'd push it to one side, and he'd reach in his pocket and pull out a scrap of paper about that big and a stub of pencil, 2 inches long. And with this pencil, he'd make these lovely little drawings on this scrap of paper. They were his ideas for pots. And if the drawing was right, he'd exit out and do another one alongside of it. He would figure out what he wanted to make that day in the studio. And he was very articulate in his thinking about forms of pots. Now, his good friend Hamada worked exactly the other way. Hamada, a Japanese potter, national treasure, and Bernard's best friend, because he helped him start his pottery in England and lived with him for 4 years while they worked together to start this pottery. Hamada never drew pots unless it was in a museum where he wanted to note some tiny detail on a pot. But he never drew his own ideas for pots. And Bernard said that the most Hamada would do would take water and dirty up his wheelhead and make a little scribble that was a general idea of the pot he wanted to make. And then he'd throw down a lump of clay and he would make the pot. But the pot was created on the wheel, not in the drawing.
The local newspaper had these obituaries for 3 of the most important potters, Hamada, Leach, and Cardew. And this was a tiny little, English language newspaper in Venezuela.
And I was devastated because I would have wanted to become a part of that historical sweep of pottery making.
I met Warren McKenzie in Venezuela in 1981. Warren had been invited by the president of a local potters group called the Venezuelan Association of the Arts of Fire. It was 10 years later, and I was at a point at which I had to make a choice and go for it if I really meant to do that. I was desperately looking for a source of practical information. Warren just turned up in Venezuela coincidentally at that exact moment in time. And I knew who he was because he was a very well-known potter even when I was in school. And then on a practical level, I got involved in the course, and when Warren got on the wheel and started making pots, I realized that I'd never seen anybody make pots who could express themselves so freely. People in the class were raising their hands to ask, why does our teacher tell us that we have to center the clay when you don't even bother to center the clay? You just slap it on there and make a pot. And so Warren would say, well, of course I center the clay. I center it enough and then make the pot. And then he would take the pot off the wheel before it appeared to be finished. In a sense, he had been inspired by the same sources that I was inspired by, or I was inspired by the same sources that he had previously been inspired by. And he was able to access those sources and go to the Leach pottery and become an apprentice and meet all of the potters of a previous generation, which in a sense were carrying on, continuing with traditional pots, historically important pots. Warren, to me, was a window, a way to access this flow, this history of pottery making.
Guillermo became my translator, and that's how we became very close.
I asked him at some point, we were walking around in the studio, and I said, Warren, will you teach me? I don't know what words I used. I don't remember exactly how I phrased it, but he said, I can only teach you to make a certain kind of pot. And I said, those are the pots I want to make. Not his pots, the same kind of pots that had inspired him and had inspired me when I was in school, when I was first exposed. And he didn't respond, he didn't commit to anything, but a few years later he invited us to come up to his studio.
When he came up here to visit his wife's family and eventually moved here, I had no hesitation about asking him to come here and work. It was great.
I'm not sure exactly how it evolved to an invitation that repeated itself every summer, probably about 25 years. I came, spent 4 or 5 weeks in the studio with Warren. The first time that I came up here was when you invited all of us to come up and make pots in 1984.
Well, when you and I worked together.
Yeah, we were.
Yeah.
I just found a flyer that Clary Ilian made for that sale. It said North meets South. And she had 2 lidded pots that looked kind of like arrows, one upside down, facing each other.
Yeah.
That group sale experience was one of the most important experiences to me in the rest of my life as a potter. Pretty much the way for me to make a living has been in group sales. When we went back to Venezuela, I said, let's do the same thing. Let's set up a group of potters, and we had, over the years, we probably had 26 group sales.
You had many more because we only had one a year. We get a bunch of students out. The first group sales we had, they weren't all potters. There was maybe a printmaker or two, and a painter, and so on.
Working all these years, year after year after year, I don't always want to go in the studio, and I force myself every day to make 4 cups right away. And usually after I've made one, I want to make another, and then I want to make another, I want to make another. And then I can't wait to put the handles on.
After the first few experiences at Warren's, when I began to pick up more or less the systems that he had set up to make the studio work, and he felt confident enough that I wasn't going to have any problems, Warren and Nancy would leave, and I would remain in the studio and take care of it, and rarely had any interruptions. That kind of focus, of course, is hard to achieve in regular life. And I suspect, though I haven't ever asked Warren directly this, but I suspect that he feels the same way. I think he enjoys working with other people around, but I think he also really enjoys working on his own, as I do.
I decided to rebuild the pottery larger than what I needed, because I thought when I quit teaching, maybe I'll want to have an apprentice. But you know, I had one apprentice one time. He was a wonderful apprentice. He helped out around the pottery completely. He didn't do my pots. We had an agreement that he wasn't to be like we were at the Leach Pottery. But he did his work. And then, in a sense, I traded critiques for the labor that he gave me and the space in the studio and all that he occupied. And that worked well. He did a really nice job. And he was with us for 2 years. But at the end of that time, while I never had an argument with this fellow, I was so happy when he was gone. And I realized that for me personally, and that's just a personal thing, I really don't like another person who is, in a sense, expecting me to give in the studio at the same time.
I would like eventually at some point to have the possibility of sharing some of the information that I've been able to gather over time, but I don't want to have, you know, a formal arrangement where there is someone in my studio all the time.
Teaching and being a potter, I love both. And when I teach and share influences and my knowledge, or you know, all that good stuff to my students, I learn from them. I think that's probably the richness and what keeps me there.
You were probably out on your own for about 4 years, and you were, you know, talking about how broke you were and just how much, how it was just, it wasn't going well. And then a couple of years ago, we were having a phone conversation, and you were talking about, you know, this is really working. It's actually happening. And because when he was here, I told him, you know, Jason, it's probably going to take 10 years. And it's like,
that doesn't register in a 24-year-old's mind. And 10 years is like a lifetime. So
yeah.
I thought I could do it in 2 years. But,
yeah, and everybody does.
Yeah.
But at about 7 years, I think it really was kicking in. And at 10, it's fully working.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah. I mean, it was really a privilege to be able to pick up the phone and call Bob and say, hey, you know, what is going on? You know, what? This is just, I'm just going downhill. And he would say, you just said, all I can say is more time. It's just going to take more time, and you know,
more pots.
It doesn't, you know, yeah. In hindsight, you just have to make a lot of pots. You can't do this right away. Pottery isn't something that like a young mind can master. 10 years in is sort of just scratching the surface.
When I left Japan after 3.5 years, 4 years of being there, Shigetoshi Nagasato, who is the middle brother, he said to me, he says, Richard, you got to understand this right away. 1/3 is the material speaking, 1/3 is the firing speaking, and 1/3 is the artist speaking. And the moment that you want to expect more, that you want to control the clay, or you want to control the firing over your 30% ratio, get a different career.
If the learning curve keeps going the way it's gone, you know, I can only assume that there's going to a whole lot of things that I haven't discovered yet. So
I had 3 sections of classes. I had 9 classes of about 20 to 24 students every year. And that you can't contact that number of people and get them excited about pottery and not have an effect on it. Yeah, and many of them went on to become very good potters. Some of them stayed around here, and they have gone on to teach also and taught more people, some of whom stay around. That's the way a community grows.
One time, Jason, there was something we were doing, and he said, I feel weird that I'm not paying for this. And I said, I'm not doing it for you. I said, I'm doing this as a debt repayment to the guy that did it for me. And so I think that's what I get out of it, is I get a chance to pay back the community that made my life possible.